The rain started the way it always does in this city, without warning, without mercy, like the sky had been holding a grudge all day and finally decided to collect. I had just stepped out of my office building on Fifth, laptop bag slung across one shoulder, umbrella already opened before the first drop hit the pavement, because some habits never leave you even after the person who taught them to you does. That's when I saw her. Sophie Bennett, standing at the corner of Fifth and Larkin, fighting with an umbrella that had clearly given up on life 3 storms ago. One spoke bent at a wrong angle, fabric flapping like a wounded bird. She hadn't seen me yet. She was too busy losing a battle with an inanimate object while her hair slowly surrendered to the weather. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 35. I run a small architecture firm 2 blocks from where I was standing, the kind of firm that renovates old buildings instead of tearing them down, because I have always believed some things are worth saving if you're patient enough to fix them properly. I hadn't seen Sophie in 3 years, 1 month, and roughly 2 weeks. Not that I was counting, except that I absolutely was. I don't know what made my feet move before my brain finished deciding. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe 3 years wasn't as long as I'd convinced myself it was. Either way, I crossed the street, stepped up beside her, and lifted my umbrella over her head without a word, the way I used to do 1,000 times before, back when doing it didn't require an explanation. Sophie froze. She turned, rain still dripping off her chin, and looked up at me like she was trying to decide whether I was real or some kind of very specific hallucination her subconscious had ordered from a catalog. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Ethan? Hi, Sophie. She looked at the umbrella over both our heads, then at me, then back at the umbrella like it had personally betrayed her by existing. She started, then stopped, then laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. You still do that? Even now? I shrugged, because I genuinely didn't have a better answer prepared. Old habits. That's not a habit, Ethan. That's a whole personality trait. She wiped rain off her face with the back of her wrist, still staring at me like she expected me to vanish if she blinked too long. You haven't held an umbrella over my head in 3 years. I haven't seen you in 3 years, I said. Different problem. That got a real laugh out of her, the kind that used to be my favorite sound in the world back when I had the right to call it that. Around us, the city kept moving, people rushing past under black umbrellas and newspapers held over heads, cars hissing through puddles, the ordinary chaos of a downtown rainstorm. None of it touched us. We just stood there under one umbrella like the last 6 feet of dry sidewalk in the whole city belonged only to us. What are you even doing on this side of town? She asked. Last I heard you were still buried in permit applications in your old office by the river. Moved the firm 2 years ago. Better light, worse parking. I nodded toward my building. You? Gallery opening 2 blocks that way. She gestured vaguely, water flicking off her fingertips. I curate now. Contemporary stuff, mostly. I forgot my good umbrella at the last place I was showing and grabbed this disaster from a lost and found bin like an idiot. It's a valiant effort, I said, glancing at the mangled thing still clutched in her hand. For a corpse. Don't insult Gerald. You named it. I name everything that fails me. Feels more honest. She looked at me again, longer this time, like she was doing some quiet internal math. You look good, Ethan. You look like you're standing in the rain, I said, which, respectfully, you still are, even with my umbrella. Physics has limits. She laughed again and stepped a little closer, close enough that the umbrella actually did its job instead of just being a symbolic gesture between 2 stubborn adults. For a second, neither of us said anything. The rain kept falling around the edge of the umbrella in a soft curtain, and somewhere in that silence I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. The specific, dangerous comfort of standing next to someone who used to know you completely. I should get to the gallery, she said finally, though she didn't move. You should, I agreed, though I didn't lower the umbrella. Neither of us moved for another 5 seconds, which in the language Sophie and I used to speak, was basically a full paragraph of unspoken conversation. Walk me? She asked. It's only 2 blocks. I promise not to make it weird. You already made it weird, I said. I'm just here for damage control. She smiled. The real one. The one that used to make my chest do something embarrassing back when I had less practice pretending it didn't. Lead the way, Cole. So I did. We didn't talk about the breakup on that walk. We talked about safe things, the kind of things people talk about when they're both quietly deciding whether the past is a door worth opening again. She told me about the gallery, about an artist she discovered who painted entire canvases using only found materials from demolition sites, which she said reminded her of me before she seemed to realize what she'd said and moved on quickly. I told her about the old textile mill my firm was converting into loft apartments, how half the beams were rotted and the other half were somehow structurally perfect, a building that couldn't decide if it wanted to survive or not. Sounds like most people, she said. Sounds like most relationships, I said, then immediately regretted it, because that door had been closed for 3 years for a reason, and I had just kicked it slightly ajar on a public sidewalk in the rain. Sophie didn't flinch. She just looked at me sideways and said, "Careful, Ethan. You're going to make this walk mean something. Would that be so terrible?" She didn't answer that. She just looked forward, toward the gallery lights glowing gold through the wet glass 2 doors down, and let the silence answer for her, which was somehow louder than anything she could have said. We stopped outside the gallery door. She turned to face me, rain still falling steadily beyond the reach of my umbrella, her hair damp at the edges despite my best efforts, her eyes doing that thing they used to do when she was deciding whether to say something true or something safe. "Thank you," she said. "For the umbrella. For walking me. For not making this as awkward as it had every right to be. I make no promises about future awkwardness," I said. This was just a strong opening. She laughed once, soft, then reached out and touched my arm, brief and light. The kind of touch that means nothing and everything depending on how long you let yourself think about it afterward. "It's good to see you, Ethan." "It's good to see you too, Sophie." She turned toward the gallery door, hesitated, then looked back at me one more time. "You know," she said, "some people would have just let me deal with Gerald. I'm not most people." "No," she said quietly. "You never were." Then she disappeared through the gallery door, leaving me standing on the sidewalk in the rain, holding an umbrella that suddenly felt heavier than it had any right to feel, watching the woman I used to build an entire future around walk back into a life I had spent 3 years convincing myself I didn't miss. I want to explain how Sophie and I ended, because it matters for everything that came after, and because it wasn't the kind of ending people expect when 2 people cared about each other as much as we did. There was no cheating, no big explosive fight, no single sentence either of us could point to and say, "That's the moment it broke." We were together for 4 years, and for most of that time, I thought we were building something permanent. I thought the version of me that showed up for her, quietly, consistently, without needing credit for it, was enough. It wasn't that Sophie didn't love that version of me. She did. That was never the problem. The problem was that somewhere in year 3, her career started asking more of her than mine was asking of me. She got offered a position at a gallery in another city, a real opportunity, the kind that doesn't come around twice for someone building a career in contemporary art curation. And I, in the single most cowardly moment of my adult life, told her I understood, told her to take it, told her we'd figure out the distance. We didn't figure it out. We tried for 8 months, phone calls that got shorter, visits that got further apart, both of us slowly learning that saying we'll figure it out is sometimes just a polite way of saying goodbye in installments. Neither of us ended it with cruelty. Sophie called me on a Tuesday night and said, quietly, "I don't think this is fair to either of us anymore." And I agreed, because by then I already knew it too, and agreeing felt like the last kind thing I could offer her. I told myself for 3 years that it was the right decision, the mature decision, 2 adults choosing their careers over a relationship that had already stretched thin. What I didn't tell myself, not honestly, not until I was standing under an umbrella in the rain with her again, was that I had never stopped comparing every woman I dated afterward to a version of Sophie that existed only in memory, unfair to both her and to them. That first rainy encounter should have been the end of the story, a nice coincidence, a warm memory, nothing more. Instead, it became the beginning. 2 weeks later, I got a text from a number I hadn't deleted, mostly out of some stubborn refusal to admit I should have. Sophie, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I need an umbrella opinion. The gallery is doing an outdoor installation next month, and I need something that won't collapse like Gerald did. You're the only person I know with strong feelings about umbrellas. I stared at that text longer than any grown man should stare at a message about umbrellas. Me, I have extremely strong feelings about umbrellas. This is not a small ask. Sophie, I remember. You once gave me a 12-minute lecture on wind resistance ratings. Me, that lecture saved you from at least 4 bad umbrella purchases. You're welcome. Sophie, coffee. Saturday. I'll bring photos of umbrella candidates, and you can judge them like the insufferable expert you are. I should have said no. I should have remembered that 3 years of careful distance existed for a reason, that reopening a door doesn't erase the fact that it was closed for good cause. Instead, I typed back one word. Me, Saturday. The coffee shop she picked was small, tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu that changed its handwriting depending on which barista was working that day. Sophie was already there when I arrived. Phone out, scrolling through photos like she'd taken the umbrella assignment far more seriously than the situation deserved. Okay, she said before I'd even sat down. Exhibit A. No hello? Hello. Now look at Exhibit A. I sat down across from her, and for the next 20 minutes we debated the structural merits of 4 different umbrellas with a level of intensity usually reserved for actual life decisions. It was easy in a way I had forgotten things could be easy, the specific comfort of falling back into rhythm with someone whose humor used to be the exact shape of mine. Somewhere between Umbrella 3 and Umbrella 4. She set her phone down and looked at me differently. Can I ask you something that isn't about umbrellas? Depends on the something. Are you seeing anyone? I hadn't expected the question, not that directly, not that early. No, I said. Not right now. You? Something flickered across her face, there and gone fast enough that I almost missed it. I was engaged, she said. Until about 4 months ago. That landed harder than I expected it to. I didn't know that. Why would you? We weren't exactly checking in. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup like it was the only warm thing in the room. His name was Preston, investment banker. Very put together. My mother loved him, which in hindsight should have been my first warning sign. What happened? She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully, the way she always did when something actually mattered. He was the kind of man who did big things well, she said. Grand gestures. Expensive dinners. A proposal on a rooftop with a string quartet he hired specifically because he'd read somewhere that string quartets make women cry, which, for the record, is a deeply strange reason to hire musicians. Did it work? The crying? I cried, she admitted, but not for the reason he thought. She looked down at her cup. The thing about Preston is he never once held an umbrella over my head unless a photographer was nearby to see him do it. I didn't say anything. I let her keep going, because I could tell she needed to say the rest of it out loud to someone who would actually hear it. It sounds so small, she said. I know it sounds small, but it was never really about the umbrella, Ethan. It was about the fact that with Preston, everything felt like it was happening for an audience. The proposal, the dinners, the way he'd introduce me at parties like I was an achievement he'd unlocked. And with you, she stopped herself. With me? She looked up, and for a second the version of her sitting across from me looked exactly like the 26-year-old I fell in love with in a rented apartment that always smelled faintly of paint thinner. With you, it was never about anyone watching. You just did the decent thing because it was decent. Nobody had to see it for it to count. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the only true thing available to me. I never stopped doing that. The umbrella thing. Even after. I noticed, she said quietly. That's what scared me on the sidewalk that day. Some habits are just muscle memory. But some of them are proof of who you actually are underneath everything else. We sat with that for a while, the coffee shop humming quietly around us, neither of us in any hurry to fill the silence with something smaller than what had just happened. Why did it end with Preston? I asked eventually. I called it off, she said. 2 weeks before the wedding. Which, for the record, is exactly as chaotic as it sounds. Cake tastings canceled, my mother still not speaking to me about it. She managed a small laugh. I realized I was about to marry a man who loved the idea of taking care of me in front of people, but had never once actually taken care of me when no one was looking. And I kept thinking about someone who used to do exactly the opposite. I felt my pulse do something complicated. Sophie, I'm not saying that to put pressure on you, she said quickly. I promise. I'm saying it because you deserve to know the truth about why I said yes to umbrella opinions on a Saturday instead of just texting you a photo. Noted, I said. For the record, I'm glad you didn't just text a photo. That earned me the smile I'd been quietly chasing since the moment I saw her fighting with Gerald in the rain. We didn't talk about us directly after that. Not that day. We finished our coffee, debated umbrella 4 into the ground, and when we finally stood to leave, she hugged me at the door, brief but real, the kind of hug that carries more honesty in 3 seconds than most conversations carry in an hour. This was nice, she said. Thank you for the emergency umbrella consultation. Anytime, I said. Genuinely. I have opinions on rain gear that I have been suppressing for 3 years. You've unleashed something. She laughed, shook her head, and walked off down the street, and I stood there again, exactly like I had 2 weeks earlier, watching her go and feeling the specific ache of a door that wasn't fully open yet, but wasn't closed anymore either. Over the next month, Sophie and I fell into something that neither of us named out loud, but both of us clearly understood. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks that had no real destination beyond the excuse of still being in each other's company. We texted most days, nothing dramatic, just the small updates people share when they're rebuilding a habit of matching to each other. A photo of a building I was working on. A story about an artist who tried to submit a painting made entirely of dryer lint. Small things. The kind of small things that, when you add enough of them together, start to look a lot like a life. I met her friend Mia during that stretch, at a gallery event Sophie invited me to, half nervously, like she wasn't sure whether inviting me crossed some line she wasn't ready to name. Mia had known Sophie since college, and she looked at me the entire evening like a woman conducting a background investigation. So you're the umbrella guy, she said, holding a glass of wine like a prop in a play only she understood. I have a name, I said. I know your name. I've heard your name approximately 400 times in the last month. Mia glanced towards Sophie, who was across the room talking to a collector, oblivious to the interrogation happening in her absence. She talks about you like you're a weather event. Sudden, disruptive, impossible to plan around. Is that a compliment? With Sophie, it's always hard to tell. Mia studied me for a long moment. Preston used to talk about her like she was an asset. You talk about her like she's a person. I just want to know which version of you is actually real before she gets hurt again. I appreciated the bluntness more than I let on. I'm not trying to hurt her, Mia. Nobody ever is, she said. That's usually not the part that matters. The conversation stuck with me longer than it should have, mostly because Mia wasn't wrong to be careful. Sophie had just come out of an engagement that clearly left more damage than she let herself show in casual conversation, and I had spent 3 years building a version of my life that didn't require anyone else's presence in it. Neither of us was exactly a safe bet. But standing in that gallery, watching Sophie laugh at something a stranger said, tilting her head the exact way she used to tilt it at my jokes years ago, I understood something with total clarity. Safe had never been the point. Right had always been the point. And I was starting to believe, cautiously, carefully, that we might actually be that again. The complication arrived on a Thursday evening, the way complications usually do, uninvited and badly timed. Sophie and I were having dinner at a small Italian place 2 blocks from her apartment, the kind of place with candles stuck in old wine bottles, and a waiter, who called everyone a Miko, whether he knew them or not. We were 3 dates deep into whatever this had quietly become, still not naming it. Both of us circling the obvious conclusion like two people who had been burned enough times to respect caution even when it was clearly unnecessary. That was when Preston walked in. I recognized him before Sophie did, mostly because her back was to the door and mine wasn't. Tall, expensive haircut, the kind of tailored jacket that costs more than most people's rent. Exactly the man I'd pictured from her description. He spotted her immediately, and something in his expression shifted from surprise to something colder. "Sophie," he said, arriving at our table with the confidence of a man who had never once been told to leave a room. She turned, and I watched her whole posture change, shoulders tightening, jaw setting. "Preston, I didn't realize you were seeing someone." His eyes moved to me, quick and assessing. "Knew already?" "This isn't your business," Sophie said, calm but firm. "I think it's a little bit my business, given we were supposed to be married 3 months ago." I called that off. "Preston, that makes it exactly 0% your business now." He looked at me again, longer this time, sizing me up with the specific arrogance of a man used to winning comparisons. "And you are?" "Ethan," I said, keeping my voice level. "Her friend." "Friend?" Preston repeated, like the word tasted wrong in his mouth. He looked back at Sophie. "This the guy? The one you used to talk about? The umbrella guy?" Sophie's face went carefully blank. "I'm not doing this here. I'm just curious," Preston said, pulling out the empty chair at our table without asking, sitting down like the evening belonged to him now. "I always wondered what kind of man makes an impression just by holding an umbrella. Seemed like a low bar to clear, honestly." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "It's not really about the umbrella, Preston. It never was." His eyes flicked to me, something sharp behind the polish. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." I leaned back slightly, unhurried. "You spent your whole relationship doing things loud enough for other people to see. I'm guessing that's why you're sitting at a table you weren't invited to right now, performing concern in front of a stranger instead of just letting her have a quiet dinner in peace." Preston's expression flickered, just for a second, the mask slipping the way it probably slipped rarely, in rooms with far fewer witnesses. "You don't know anything about our relationship," he said. "I know enough," I said. "She told me about the rooftop proposal. String quartet and all. Sounds like a beautiful evening, Preston. For everyone except her." Sophie's eyes met mine, something grateful and steady passing between us. Preston stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor loud enough to draw glances from nearby tables. "This is absurd. Sophie, we need to talk, actually talk, not whatever performance this is." "We did talk," Sophie said, voice steady now, stronger than it had been a moment ago. "2 weeks before the wedding. You made it very clear you thought I was making a mistake calling it off. I made it very clear I wasn't. That conversation is over, Preston. It's been over for 4 months. You're really going to sit here and choose him?" Preston's voice climbed slightly, enough that the restaurant's ambient noise dipped around us, other diners pretending not to listen while listening intently. "A man who runs some small renovation firm and apparently specializes in umbrella etiquette? I'm going to sit here," Sophie said, "and finish my dinner with someone who has never once made me feel like an accessory to his own image. So yes, Preston, I'm choosing peace. If that happens to look like Ethan, that's not a coincidence you get to be angry about." The restaurant went quiet around our table in that specific way public spaces go quiet when they sense a scene ending rather than beginning. Preston looked between us, something in his expression finally cracking under the weight of being genuinely, publicly refused. "Fine," he said, straightening his jacket like the gesture might restore some of the dignity the last 2 minutes had cost him. "Enjoy your umbrella, Sophie." He turned and walked out, and the restaurant slowly returned to its normal hum. Conversations resuming, the waiter reappearing with an apologetic look and a fresh basket of bread nobody had asked for. Sophie let out a long breath, hands slightly unsteady around her water glass. "I'm sorry about that." "Don't apologize for him," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know," she said. "It's just, That's the first time I've seen him since I called things off. I didn't expect it to still make my hands shake. I reached across the table, not grabbing her hand, just resting mine near hers, close enough that she could close the distance if she wanted to. She did. For what it's worth, I said, you handled that better than most people would have handled a surprise appearance from an ex-fiancé mid-dinner. I had help, she said, looking at me properly now, some of the tension finally leaving her shoulders. You didn't have to say any of that. I wanted to, I said. Every word of it. She was quiet for a moment, turning her water glass slowly on the table. Can I tell you something honest? Always. Watching you sit there and not flinch, not perform, not make it about proving yourself to him. That told me more about you in 2 minutes than 4 years with Preston ever told me about him. Her voice softened. I think that's when I stopped pretending this was just coffee and umbrella talk. What is it then? I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer, had known it since the moment I crossed a rainy street toward her without giving my feet permission first. She looked at me steadily. I think you know. I did. I just needed to hear her say it, the way you sometimes need to hear a thing out loud before you're allowed to believe it's real. We finished dinner slowly after that, the conversation easier, lighter, the ghost of Preston's interruption fading with every shared laugh. When we stepped outside, the sky had opened up again, rain falling in that steady, quiet way that makes a city feel smaller and softer than it usually does. I opened my umbrella automatically, without thinking, the way I always did, and held it over both our heads as we started walking toward her apartment. Sophie glanced up at it, then at me, something warm and a little disbelieving in her expression. You really do still do that, she said. Even now. Even after everything. I told you, I said. Habit. No, she said, stopping under a street lamp, rain tapping softly against the umbrella above us, the city glowing gold and wet around her. It's not a habit, Ethan. I think I finally understand that. It's just who you are when nobody's asking you to be anything else. I looked at her, really looked at her, the way I hadn't let myself look at anyone in 3 years, careful and complete, and a little bit terrified of how much it still mattered. I never stopped loving you, Sophie, I said. I told myself I did. It was easier than admitting I let the best thing in my life walk onto a plane because I was too scared to ask her to stay. Her eyes went bright, glassy in the streetlight. I used to think about that flight, she said quietly. How I kept waiting for my phone to ring the whole way there. It never did. I know, I said. I've regretted that silence every day since. Why didn't you call? Because I thought loving you meant getting out of your way, I said. I didn't understand yet that sometimes loving someone means standing exactly in their way, gently, and asking them to stay anyway. Sophie stepped closer, close enough that the umbrella barely had to work to keep us both dry, close enough that I could see the exact moment her guard came down completely. I'm asking you something now, she said, and I need you to actually answer it instead of being noble about it. Ask, is this real? This, whatever this is becoming. Because I can't do another rooftop proposal for an audience, Ethan. I can't do another relationship that only looks good from the outside. I need something quiet and true, even if it's smaller than what Preston offered me. It's real, I said, no hesitation this time. It's the realest thing I've felt in 3 years. Sophie, I don't want the version of us that requires an audience. I never did. I just want the version where I get to hold an umbrella over your head for the rest of my life, and nobody has to know it's happening for it to count. She laughed, a small broken sound that turned into something like a sob halfway through, and then she kissed me, right there on the sidewalk, rain falling steadily around the small dry circle we'd built together, the city moving past us in every direction like none of it mattered at all, because in that moment, none of it did. When we finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine, breathing unsteady, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in 3 years. Well, she said, that definitely changed everything. It usually does, I said, when it's real. We walked the rest of the way to her apartment slowly, unhurried, umbrella tilted carefully to keep us both dry, her hand finding mine somewhere along the way like it had never really left it in the first place. 6 months later, Sophie's gallery hosted an exhibit built entirely around the artist she'd discovered, the one who worked with found materials from demolition sites. I stood near the back of the room during the opening, watching her move through the crowd, confident and radiant, completely herself in a way she hadn't been the night I met Mia. At one point, she caught my eye across the room and smiled, a private smile just for me, and I felt the specific gratitude of a man who had been given a second chance he didn't fully believe he deserved. We moved in together 4 months after that, not with fireworks, not with a grand gesture, just two people quietly agreeing that Sunday mornings felt wrong when they happened in separate apartments. Mia, to my great relief, eventually stopped interrogating me and started texting me directly, which Sophie assured me was the highest form of approval Mia was capable of offering. A year to the day after that first rainy afternoon on 5th and Larkin, I proposed to Sophie on that exact corner. No string quartet, no photographer, no rooftop, just an umbrella held over both our heads while rain fell steadily around us, and the city moved past like it had somewhere more important to be. "This is either deeply romantic or deeply unhinged," she said, staring at the ring, laughing through tears. "Proposing on the corner where you ambushed me with an umbrella. I like to think of it as full circle," I said. "Also, Gerald would have wanted this. Gerald has been dead for over a year, Ethan. He'd have wanted this anyway." She said yes before I even finished getting fully down on one knee, which she still claims wasn't technically fair to the moment, and which I still maintain was the single best interruption of my entire life. We got married the following spring, small ceremony, close friends, no string quartet, though Mia did threaten to hire one out of spite for Preston, an offer we politely declined. Sophie carried an umbrella down the aisle instead of a traditional bouquet, closed and ribboned with flowers, a small inside joke that made half the guests laugh and the other half cry, sometimes both at once. Years later, when people ask how we got back together, Sophie tells them I ambushed her with an umbrella on a rainy sidewalk. I tell them she was losing a battle with a dying umbrella named Gerald and needed rescuing whether she admitted it or not. Both versions are true. Neither is the whole story. The whole story is that some habits aren't really habits at all. They're proof, quiet and unglamorous, of who a person actually is when nobody's watching, when there's no audience to perform for, no rooftop, no string quartet, just rain falling and a choice to keep someone dry anyway. Sophie once told me that Preston did big things loudly and small things never. I think about that a lot. How the biggest gestures in the world mean nothing if the small ones are missing, and how sometimes the smallest gesture, an umbrella held without being asked, can say more about a person's heart than any speech ever could. I still hold that umbrella over her every single time it rains, 3 years of marriage and now, no less automatic than it was the very first time. Last week she caught me doing it on our way into a grocery store, barely even raining, more of a mist really, and she just looked at me and shook her head, smiling. "You really never stop, do you?" "Nope," I said. "You're stuck with it." "Good," she said, slipping her hand into mine. "I was hoping you'd say that. So tell me, if you ran into your ex fighting a losing battle with a broken umbrella in the pouring rain, would you have crossed the street without thinking twice, the way I did? And have you ever done something small and automatic for someone, only to realize much later that the small thing was actually the whole truth of who you are? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.